It is a Thursday morning in late June, and my youngest son, who was 7 years old at the time, walked out the back door barefoot, the way he always did in summer, heading toward the garden to help me pull weeds before the heat of the day came in. He stopped 3 steps from the door. I was already outside, about 20 feet away near the bean rows, and I heard him stop more than I saw it. That particular stillness a child makes when something is wrong. I looked up and saw him standing completely frozen, looking down at something near the bottom of the porch steps. It was a timber rattlesnake. A large one, coiled in the shade at the base of the steps, exactly where a 7-year-old's bare foot would have landed on the next step down. He did not move. I told him quietly to back up, 1 step at a time, back toward the door. He did. The snake did not strike. We went inside, and I stood at the kitchen window watching it until it moved off on its own, which took about 20 minutes. That evening, my husband and I had a long conversation about what we were going to do differently. Not about the snakes specifically, because timber rattlesnakes are part of this landscape and have been for longer than any of us have been on this property, and we have no interest in eliminating them from the land entirely. They control the rodent population in the fields and the outbuildings better than any trap we have ever used. But about what we were going to change around the house itself, around the garden, around the places our children and grandchildren walk barefoot on summer mornings. What we did in the weeks that followed, and what I'm going to share with you today, is the complete system my family developed and refined over the years since that morning, drawing on methods my mother-in-law taught us, methods from older neighbors who had lived on working farms their whole lives, and from straightforward observation of how snakes actually behave, what draws them in, what keeps them away, and what the products sold for snake repellent actually do versus what they claim to do. I am Sarah Yoder, and I want to start with the second thing before the first, the way I always do when something important needs to be said at the beginning. There is a product sold at most garden centers and hardware stores, usually in a yellow and green container, labeled snake repellent. It contains naphthalene, the same compound in mothballs, and it has been sold for this purpose for decades. I want to be straightforward with you about it before we go any further. The scientific evidence that naphthalene repels snakes in any meaningful, reliable way is extremely weak. Multiple field studies have tested it under controlled conditions and found that snakes cross through areas treated with naphthalene without any significant change in behavior. The Environmental Protection Agency has actually taken action against certain naphthalene-based snake repellent products in the past for making claims that were not supported by evidence. I am not telling you never to use it. I am telling you that if you are spending $12 to $20 on a container of snake repellent granules and spreading them around your yard expecting snakes to avoid the treated area, the way a slug avoids salt or a wasp avoids a competing nest, you are likely spending money on something that is not working the way you believe it is. The real methods that actually reduce snake activity around your home are not chemical. They are structural and environmental, and they work because they address the reasons snakes come to your yard in the first place, rather than attempting to irritate them away with a smell. Let me explain what actually draws snakes to a yard, because this is the foundation of everything that follows. Snakes are not in your yard because they like your yard. They are in your yard because your yard has things they need. Every snake, venomous or not, is in any given location for one of 3 reasons: food, shelter, or warmth. If your yard has all 3, your yard is excellent snake habitat. If your yard has none of the 3, snakes pass through occasionally but do not stay. The entire strategy for keeping snakes away from the areas around your home is removing or reducing these 3 attractants in the specific places you do not want snakes, while accepting that on a working property with outbuildings and fields, you will never eliminate them entirely and should not try to. Food first, because it is the most important and the most directly controllable. Snakes eat rodents, frogs, toads, lizards, birds, and bird eggs, and other snakes. On a property like ours, the primary food source that draws snakes close to the house and garden is rodents, mice specifically, because mice live where people store food and where food scraps accumulate, which is near the house and near the garden. A snake that finds mice near your back door will come back to that location because that is where the food is. Eliminate the mice near the house, and you dramatically reduce the reason snakes have to be near the house. This sounds obvious, but the application is specific. Bird feeders, left filled all season, drop seed onto the ground below them constantly. That dropped seed feeds mice. Those mice draw snakes. If you have a bird feeder within 30 feet of your house or your main outdoor living areas, and you have a snake problem near those areas, the bird feeder is almost certainly part of the reason. Move the feeder to the far edge of the property, away from the house, or stop filling it during the months when snakes are most active, late spring through early fall. Pet food left outside overnight feeds mice and other rodents. Bring it in every evening. Compost bins that are not properly managed, open piles of kitchen scraps that attract rodents, are another common source. A properly managed compost bin with a solid base and a lid does not attract rodents the way an open pile does. Firewood stacked against the house is one of the most reliable snake attractors that exists because it provides both food and shelter simultaneously. Mice nest in wood piles. Snakes follow the mice into the wood pile and then have a warm, sheltered, food-rich habitat 3 feet from your back door. Move firewood storage at least 20 feet from the house. Stack it off the ground on a rack rather than directly on the soil. Elevating it reduces the shelter value for both mice and snakes. Garden areas present a specific challenge because they inherently attract the insects and small creatures that form the base of the food chain snakes are part of. We have never been able to make our garden snake-free, and I am not sure we would want to, even if we could, because the garter snakes and rat snakes in our garden do real work controlling pests. What we have done is make the paths and areas immediately around the garden, the places we walk regularly and where our children play, less attractive as resting and hunting spots for snakes. Shelter is the second attractant, and this is where most of the practical work happens around the house itself. Snakes seek shelter for 2 reasons: protection from predators and thermoregulation. Snakes cannot generate their own body heat, and they need to move between warm and cool environments throughout the day to maintain their body temperature in the range where they can function. A pile of flat rocks in direct sun is a perfect snake basking spot in the morning. A dense ground cover planting or a gap under a shed foundation provides the cool retreat they need in the afternoon heat. When your yard provides easy access to both, it becomes high-quality snake habitat. Tall grass and dense ground cover planting immediately around the house provides hiding and hunting cover that snakes use and that makes encounters with people more likely, not less, because the snake is hidden and cannot see you coming any better than you can see it. Keep grass mowed short within at least 10 feet of the house and within the paths and areas where people walk regularly. This does not need to extend to the whole property. It needs to extend to the places where people and snakes are most likely to encounter each other unexpectedly. Gaps and openings in the foundation of the house, the outbuildings, and any retaining walls or stone features near the house are potential entry points both for mice and for the snakes that follow them. Walk around your foundation in early spring before snakes become active and look at every point where a pipe, a wire, or a vent penetrates the foundation. Look at where the foundation meets the soil. Any gap larger than a 1/4 inch is potentially a mouse entry point, and where mice go, snakes will eventually investigate. Seal these with hardware cloth, which is a fine metal mesh, or with concrete caulk, depending on the nature of the gap. The area under decks and porches deserves specific attention because it is almost universally good snake habitat, cool and sheltered, and often close enough to the house that mice move freely between the crawl space and the living area. Enclosing the perimeter of a deck or porch with a fine mesh hardware cloth, buried a few inches into the soil at the base to prevent mice from digging under it, creates a barrier that keeps both mice and snakes out of that under-deck space. This is not a quick project, but it is a permanent one, and the difference in snake and rodent activity around a house where this has been done versus one where it has not is significant. Warmth is the third attractant, and it is the one most people do not think about until they find a snake somewhere unexpected. Asphalt driveways, concrete walkways, and dark-colored mulches hold heat from the sun and remain warm long after the air temperature has dropped in the evening. This is exactly why you are more likely to find snakes on a driveway or a path in the late afternoon or evening than in the middle of the day. They are not going somewhere. They are lying on a warm surface because that is what cold-blooded animals do when they need to raise their body temperature. This is not a behavior you can change, but knowing it changes when and how you move through those areas. Looking down before stepping onto a dark surface in the late afternoon or evening, especially after a hot day, takes about half a second and has prevented more unexpected encounters on this property than anything else we have done. The specific plants that actually help, because I want to spend time on this because it is where the real traditional knowledge lives. There are plants that do have some evidence for snake avoidance, not because they chemically repel snakes the way naphthalene claims to, but because snakes avoid moving through certain textures and through certain strong aromatic environments, and because some of these plants reduce the insect and small animal populations that make an area attractive to snakes in the first place. Marigolds planted densely along garden borders and near the house foundation do two things that matter for snake management. They repel aphids, whiteflies, and certain other insects that attract the larger insects and small creatures snakes feed on, reducing the food chain that ends with a snake in your garden. And they have a strong aromatic quality that many snakes, which rely heavily on scent-based chemical sensing through their tongue and Jacobson's organ, seem to find unpleasant as a resting environment. They will not stop a snake from crossing through an area, but a dense border of marigolds is a less attractive resting and hunting spot than bare soil or mulch. Wormwood, also called Artemisia absinthium, is a silver-gray aromatic perennial that has been used in this region for generations as a border plant around gardens and foundations, specifically because of its extremely strong volatile oils. The scent is sharp, almost medicinal, and it is one of the plants that traditional farm families planted along the south-facing side of outbuildings, specifically to discourage snakes from using the warm wall as a resting spot. Plant it as a low border along any south or west-facing foundation where you have found snakes basking. It will not drive them from the property, but it makes that specific warm spot less comfortable as a regular resting location. Lemongrass and citronella grass both contain citronella oil, which has documented repellent effects on several insect species and some evidence for snake avoidance as well, likely for the same reasons as wormwood, the strong volatile oils creating an aromatic environment that snakes find less comfortable than an unscented one. Plant these in containers near doors and walkways where you want the aromatic effect most concentrated. As container plants, they can be moved to the most relevant locations through the season. Garlic and onion planted around garden borders have both the aromatic quality and the soil conditioning benefit of suppressing certain soil-dwelling insects and pests that form part of the food chain beneath snakes. My mother-in-law planted garlic along every garden border every year, primarily for cooking, secondarily for pest management, and she noted throughout her life that the border areas around a garlic-planted garden seem to have fewer snake sightings than areas without it. Whether this is the garlic specifically or the combination of effects from a well-maintained, strongly aromatic border planting is difficult to say. The garlic is worth planting regardless. Clove and cinnamon essential oil, diluted in water, sprayed along paths and near entry points to the house, is one of the few aromatic treatments that has some actual evidence behind it. Both clove and cinnamon oil contain compounds that affect the chemical sensing of snakes, and a spray applied to the surface of pathways and entry points can make those specific areas less comfortable for snakes to cross and rest in. The effect is not permanent. It washes off with rain and needs to be reapplied. But as a targeted treatment for specific high-traffic areas near the house, it is more effective than naphthalene and costs about the same. Mix 15 to 20 drops of clove or cinnamon essential oil with a quart of water in a spray bottle and apply to paths, doorway thresholds, and the base of steps. Reapply after rain. The most important tool of all, and the one no product and no plant can replace, is attention. Simply knowing what snakes in your area look like, knowing their habits, knowing what time of day they are most active and where they most commonly rest and hunt, changes your experience of sharing a landscape with them from a series of frightening surprises to something you can navigate with reasonable confidence. In our region, the venomous species are the timber rattlesnake and the copperhead. Both are ambush hunters that sit quietly and wait for prey, rather than actively pursuing it through open areas the way some non-venomous species do. Both rely on camouflage and stillness as their primary defense. The timber rattlesnake will rattle before striking in the vast majority of encounters with people, as my son experienced that morning, which is why knowing what that rattle sounds like is worth knowing, and why the absence of that rattle in a non-rattlesnake species is not evidence that the snake is safe. The copperhead does not rattle and relies entirely on camouflage, which is why it is involved in more accidental bites than the timber rattlesnake, despite being significantly less venomous. You step on something you could not see. Knowing that copperheads specifically favor leaf litter, the edges of stone features, and areas of dense, low ground cover, and moving carefully through those environments in summer, is practical knowledge that has more value than any amount of granules spread around the yard. Teach your children the same. Not to fear snakes categorically, because that fear leads to panicked reactions that increase the risk of a bite, but to recognize what they are looking at, to stop and look before stepping anywhere they cannot clearly see, and to give any snake they encounter the space to move away on its own. A snake that is not cornered and not directly threatened will almost always choose to leave rather than strike. That is true of timber rattlesnakes, and it is true of copperheads, and it was true of the snake at the bottom of our porch steps that Thursday morning in June. My son stood still. The snake moved away. Nobody was hurt. That is the whole system. Remove the food. Remove the shelter. Manage the specific warm spots where snakes rest near where people walk. Plant the border plants that make those areas less comfortable as resting spots. Treat the specific high-traffic entry points with an aromatic spray that has real evidence behind it. Know what you are sharing the land with. Move through it with attention. This is not a system that eliminates snakes from your property, and it is not designed to be. It is a system that reduces unexpected encounters in the specific places where those encounters are most dangerous: around the house, around the paths children walk, around the garden entry points, while accepting that on a working piece of land, snakes are part of what makes the land work. My mother-in-law kept this property for 40 years before us and never had a snake bite on anyone in her family. Not because she killed every snake she found. She did not. Because she managed the environment around the house thoughtfully, and she moved through the land with the kind of attention that comes from knowing what lives there. That is what this video is. Someone telling you what lives there and how to live alongside it safely. Tell me in the comments what venomous species are in your area and whether you have had an encounter near your house or garden. And if your family had their own methods for managing snakes around a working property, I would very much like to hear them. I read every single comment. Next time, I am going to show you the one garden border plant my mother-in-law grew every year that she said kept more pests away from the vegetables than anything else she ever tried. Insects, rabbits, deer, and yes, she credited it with helping with snakes too. One plant. It costs almost nothing to grow from seed, and once it is established, it comes back every year without replanting. I will see you then. That morning in June, my son stood still and the snake moved away. That is still the best snake encounter management system that exists. Know what you are looking at. Give it space. It almost always chooses to leave. That is how it has worked on this land for as long as anyone here can remember, and that is how it still works on any piece of ground that pays attention.